Hello everyone, and happy Valentine's Day. This is the 10th story from the second day of Boccaccio's Decameron. There once lived in Pisa a very wealthy judge called Messer Riccardo di Cinzinca, who had rather more brain than brawn, and who, thinking perhaps he could satisfy a wife with those same talents that he brought to his studies, went to a great deal of trouble to find himself a wife who was both young and beautiful, whereas he had been capable of giving himself such good advice as he gave to others. He should have avoided marrying anyone with either of the attributes in question. He succeeded in his quest, however, for Messer Lotto Gualandi agreed to let him marry a daughter of his called Bartolomea, who was one of the prettiest and most charming young ladies in Pisa, a city where most of the women look ugly as sin. The judge brought her home with an air of great festivity, and although the wedding was celebrated in truly magnificent style, on the first night he only managed to come at her once in order to consummate the marriage, and even then he very nearly fell out of the game before it was over. And the next morning, being a skinny and withered and a spineless sort of fellow, he had to swallow down Vernaccia wine, energy tablets, and various other restoratives to pull himself around. Now, this judge fellow, having thus obtained a better notion of his powers, began to teach her a calendar which school children are apt to consult, of the sort that was once at use in Ravenna. For he made it clear to her that there was not a single day that was not the feast of one or more saints, out of respect for whom, as he would demonstrate by devious arguments, man and woman should abstain from sexual union. To the foregoing he added holidays of obligation, the 4 ember weeks, the eves of the apostles, and a numerous array of subsidiary saints, Fridays and Saturdays, the Sabbath, the whole of Lent, certain phases of the moon, and various special occasions, possibly because he was under the impression that one had to take vacations from bedding a woman, in the same way that he sometimes took vacations from summoning up in the law courts. For a long time, much to the chagrin of his lady, whose turn came around once a month at the most, he abided by this regime, always keeping a close watch on her, lest anyone else should teach her as good a knowledge of the working days as he had taught her of the holidays. One summer, during a heat wave, Messer Ricciardo happened to be seized by a longing to go and relax in the fresh air at a very fine villa of his near Montenero, and he took his fair lady with him. And during their stay, in order to provide her with a little recreation, he arranged a day's fishing, he and the fisherman taking out one boat, while she and some other ladies went along to watch from a second. But as he became absorbed in what he was doing, they drifted several miles out to sea, almost before they realized what was happening. While their concentration was at its peak, a small galley came upon the scene, commanded by Paganino da Mare, a notorious pirate of the time, who, having caught sight of the 2 boats, came sailing towards them. They turned and fled, but before they could reach safety, Paganino overtook the boat containing the women, and on catching sight of the fair lady, he disregarded everything else and took her aboard his galley before making off again under the very eyes of Messer Ricciardo, who had meanwhile reached the shore. Needless to say, our friend the judge was extremely distressed on seeing all of this, for he was jealous of the very air that she breathed, and all he could do now was to wander about Pisa and other places, bemoaning the wickedness of the pirates, without having any idea who it was that had kidnapped his wife, or where she had been taken. Paganino reckoned himself very fortunate when he saw how beautiful she was, and since he was unmarried, he made up his mind to keep her. But she was weeping bitterly, and so he poured out a stream of endearments in an attempt to console her. And when night descended, having come to the conclusion that he had been wasting his time all day with words, he turned to comforting her with deeds, for he was not the sort of man to pay any heed to calendars, and he had long since forgotten about feasts and holy days. So effective were the consolations he provided, that before they had reached Monaco, the judge and his laws had faded from the lady's memory, and life with Paganino was a positive joy. And after he had brought her to Monaco, in addition to consoling her continuously night and day, Paganino treated her with all the respect due to a wife. When, some time afterward, information reached Messer Riccardo of his lady's whereabouts, he was passionately resolved to go and fetch her in person, being convinced that he alone could handle the affair with the necessary tact. He was quite prepared to pay whatever ransom was demanded, and took ship for Monaco, where he caught sight of her soon after his arrival. But she had seen him too, and that same evening she warned Paganino and informed him of her husband's intentions. Next morning, Messer Ricciardo saw Paganino and engaged him in conversation, losing no time in getting on friendly and familiar terms with him, while Paganino, pretending not to know who he was, waited to see what he was proposing to do. At the earliest opportunity, Messer Ricciardo disclosed the purpose of his visit as concisely and politely as he could, then asked Paganino to hand the lady over, naming whatever sum he required by way of ransom. "Welcome to Monaco, sir," replied Paganino, smiling broadly, "and as to your request, I will answer you briefly, as follows. It is true that I have a young lady in my house, but I couldn't say whether she is your wife or some other man's wife, for I do not know you. And all I know about the lady is that she has been living with me for some time. I have taken a liking to you, however, and since you appear to be honest, I will take you to see her. And if indeed you are her husband, as you claim to be, she will no doubt recognize you. If she confirms your story and wants to go with you, you are such an amiable sort of fellow that I am content to leave the amount of the ransom to your own good judgment. But if your story isn't true, it would be dishonest of you to try and deprive me of her, for I am a young man, and no less entitled than anyone else to keep a woman, especially this one, for she is the nicest I ever saw." "Of course she is my wife," said Messer Ricciardo. "You will soon be convinced when you take me to see her, for she will fling her arms around my neck immediately. I could ask for nothing better than the arrangement you suggest." "In that case," said Paganino, "let us proceed." And so off they went to Paganino's house, where they entered a large room, and Paganino sent for the lady, who came in from another room, composed in appearance and neatly dressed, and walked over to where the two men were standing. But she took no more notice of Messer Ricciardo than if he were some total stranger coming into the house as Paganino's guest. On seeing this, the judge was greatly astonished, for he had been expecting her to greet him with a display of frenzied rejoicing. Perhaps, he thought, the melancholy and prolonged suffering to which I have been subjected ever since I lost her have wrought such a change in my appearance that she no longer knows who I am. He therefore addressed her as follows. "Madame, it was a costly idea of mine to take you fishing with me, for nobody ever experienced so much sorrow as I have endured from the day I lost you, and now it appears, from the coldness of your greeting, that you do not even recognize me. Don't you see that I am your Messer Ricciardo? Don't you understand that I came to Monaco fully prepared to offer this gentleman whatever ransom he required, so that I could have you back again and take you away from this house? And are you perhaps unaware that he has been good enough to tell me that he'll hand you over for whatever sum I choose to pay?" The lady turned toward him, with the faintest suggestion of a smile on her lips. "Are you addressing me, sir?" she asked. "You must surely be mistaking me for someone else, for, as far as I can recall, I have never seen you before in my life." "Oh, come now," said Messer Ricciardo. "Take a good look at me, and if you choose to remember properly, you will soon see that I am your husband, Ricciardo de Cinzinca." "You will forgive me for saying so, sir," said the lady, "but it is not so proper as you imagine for me to stare at you, and in any case I have already looked at you sufficiently to know that I have never seen you before." Messer Ricciardo supposed her to be doing this because she was afraid of Paganino, in whose presence she was perhaps reluctant to admit that she recognized him. And so, after a while, he asked Paganino if he would kindly allow him to speak with her alone in her room. Paganino agreed, on condition that he make no attempt to kiss her against her will, and he told the lady to go with Messer Ricciardo into her room, listen to what he had to say, and reply as freely as she pleased. Thus the lady and Messer Ricciardo went into her room, closed the door behind them, and sat down. "Oh, my dearest," said Messer Ricciardo, "my dear, sweet darling, my treasure, how do you remember your Ricciardo, who loves you more than life itself? No? How is this possible? Can I have changed so much? Oh, my pretty one, do take another little look at me." The lady, who had begun to laugh, interrupted his babbling, saying, "You are well aware that I possess a sufficiently good memory to know that you are my husband, Messer Ricciardo de Cincinca. But you showed very little sign of knowing me when I was living with you, because if, either then or now, you were as wise as you wish to pretend, you should certainly have had the gumption to realize that a fresh and vigorous young woman like myself needs something more than food and clothes, even if modesty forbids her to say so, and you know how little of that you provided. If you were more interested in studying the law than in keeping a wife, you should never have married in the first place. Not that you ever seemed to me to be a judge. On the contrary, you had such an expert knowledge of feasts and festivals, to say nothing of fasts and vigils, that I thought you must be a town crier. And I can tell you this, that if you had given as many holidays to the workers on your estates as you gave to the one whose job it was to tend my little field, you would never have harvested a single ear of corn. But by the merciful will of God, who took pity on my youth, I chanced upon the man with whom I share this room, where holy days, the ones you used to celebrate so religiously, being more devoted to pious works than to the service of the ladies, have never been heard of. And not only has that door remained firmly shut against Sabbaths, Fridays, vigils, Ember days, and Lent, which is such a long-drawn-out affair, but work goes on all the time here, day and night, so that the place is a positive hive of activity. Why, this very morning the bell for matins had barely stopped ringing before he was up and about, and I can't begin to tell you how busy we were. Hence I intend to remain with him and work while I am still young, and save up all those fasts and holy days so that I can turn to them, along with pilgrimages, when I am an old woman. As for you, be so good as to clear off as soon as you can, and have as many holidays as you like, but not with me." As he listened to these words, Messer Ricciardo suffered the agonies of the damned, and when he saw that she had finished, he said, "Oh, my dearest, how can you say such things? Have you lost all regard for your honor and that of your parents? Do you mean to say you prefer to stay on here, living in mortal sin as this man Strumpet, rather than to live in Pisa as my wife? When this fellow grows tired of you, he will turn you out and make you an object of ridicule, whereas I will always cherish you, and you will always be the mistress of my house, whatever happens. Do you mean to cast aside your honor and forsake one who loves you more than life itself, simply because of this immoderate and unseemly appetite of yours? Oh, my treasure, don't say these things any more. Come away with me. Now that I know what you want, I'll make a special effort in the future. Do change your mind, my precious, and come back to me, for my life has been sheer misery ever since the day you were taken away from me." "As to my honor," the lady replied, "I mean to defend what remains of it as jealously as anyone. I only wish my parents had displayed an equal regard for it when they handed me over to you, but since they were so unconcerned about my honor then, I do not intend to worry about their honor now. And if I am living in mortal sin, it can be pestle sin too for all I care. So stop making such a song and dance about it, and let me tell you this, that I feel as though I am Paganino's wife here. It was in Pisa that I felt like a strumpet, considering all that rigmarole about the moon's phases, and all those geometrical calculations that were needed before we could bring the planets into conjunction, whereas here Paganino holds me in his arms the whole night long, and squeezes and bites me, and as God is my witness, he never leaves me alone. You say you will make an effort, but how? By doing things in 3 easy stages, and springing to attention with a blow from a cudgel. I've noticed, of course, what a fine, strong fellow you've become since I saw you last. Be off with you, and put your efforts into staying alive, for it seems to me that you won't survive much longer. You have such a sickly and emaciated look about you. Oh, and another thing. Even if Paganino leaves me, and he seems to have no such intention provided I want to stay, I would never come back to you in any case, because if you were to be squeezed from head to toe, there wouldn't be a thimbleful of sauce to show for it. Life with you was all loss and no gain as far as I was concerned. So if there were to be a next time, I would be trying my luck elsewhere. Once and for all, then, I repeat that I intend to stay here, where there are no holy days and no vigils. And if you don't clear off quickly, I shall scream for help and claim you are trying to molest me." On seeing that the situation was hopeless, and realizing for the first time how foolish he had been to take a young wife when he was so impotent, Messer Ricciardo walked out of the room, feeling all sad and forlorn. And although he had a long talk with Paganino, it made no difference whatever. And so finally, having achieved precisely nothing, he left the lady there and returned to Pisa, where his grief threw him into such a state of lunacy that whenever people met him in the street and put any question to him, the only answer they got was, "There's never any rest for the bar." Shortly afterward, he died, and when the news reached Paganino, knowing how deeply the lady loved him, he made her his legitimate wife. And without paying any heed to holy days or vigils or observing Lent, they worked their fingers to the bone and thoroughly enjoyed themselves. So it seems to me, dear ladies, that our friend Bernabo, by taking the course he pursued with Ambrogliulo, was riding on the edge of a precipice. Neifile blushed a little on receiving this honor, so that her face was like the rose that blooms at dawn in early summer, while her eyes, which she had lowered slightly, thus ends the story. And so the ladies made their way with the 3 young men to a miniature garden, where they whiled away their time agreeably before supper. They then had supper, in the course of which there was much laughter and merriment, and when they had risen from the table, at the Queen's request, Emilia began to dance, while Pampanea sang the following song, the others joining in the chorus. "If 'twere not I, what woman would sing, who am content in everything? Come, love, the cause of all my joy, of all my hope and happiness, come let us sing together, not of love's sighs and agony, but only of its jocundness, and its clear burning ardour, in which I revel, joyfully, as if thou wert a god to me. Love, the first day I felt thy fire, thou settest before mine eyes a youth, of such accomplishment, whose able strength and keen desire and bravery could none, in truth, find any complement. With thee I sing, Lord of love, of this, so much in him lies all my bliss. And this my greatest pleasure is, that he loves me with equal fire. Cupid, all thanks to thee, within this world I have my bliss, and I may in the next entire. I love so faithfully, if God who sees us from above will grant this boon upon our love." When this song was finished, they sang a number of others, danced many dances, and played several tunes. But eventually the Queen decided it was time for them to go to bed, and they all retired to their respective rooms, carrying torches to light them on their way. For the next 2 days they attended to those matters about which the Queen had spoken earlier, and looked forward eagerly to Sunday. Here ends the 2nd day of the Decameron.